For 6 seconds, everything seemed normal. The aircraft was cruising smoothly through a pale band of morning light, holding altitude and heading with the quiet precision modern jets are built for. Inside the cockpit, two professionals worked the routine they had repeated so many times it felt like muscle memory. Switches were where they should be. Numbers matched. The autopilot tracked the flight plan. The cabin behind them was calm, filled with ordinary sounds, pages turning, low conversations, a distant clink of a cart. There were no sirens, no flashing red warnings, no urgent voice in the headset ordering immediate action. Passengers had no reason to worry. They trusted the system, the crew, the layers of redundancy that make air travel feel like the safest way to cross a map. But disasters rarely announce themselves with drama at the beginning. They begin with something small, something plausible, something that can be explained away in a sentence. Shortly after takeoff, the crew noticed an irregularity. Not a catastrophic failure, not an explosion, not the kind of emergency that makes even a veteran pilot's heart spike. It was subtle, a reading that did not align with expectation. A cue suggesting one system might be behaving differently than planned. The kind of issue training manuals cover in quiet, methodical steps. A condition with procedures designed to prevent the one thing humans often do under pressure: improvising too early. At that moment, the crew had options. They could pause and verify. They could consult the written procedure. They could split tasks, one pilot flying while the other managed the abnormal indication. They could involve air traffic control, request time, climb to a safe altitude, stabilize everything first, and then troubleshoot. Every one of those options existed for a reason. Everyone had saved lives before. And yet, instead of following the standard sequence step by step, a different choice was made. It was not reckless in the way movies portray recklessness. It was not a joke or a dare. It was not a malicious shortcut. It was a decision that felt reasonable because it matched something familiar. The crew believed they understood what they were seeing. They believed they could resolve it quickly. They believed experience could compress the process. They believed time was on their side. 6 seconds. That is how long it took to commit to the choice. 6 seconds to move from uncertainty to action. 6 seconds to turn a question into a plan. 6 seconds to lock in a mental model that would shape everything that followed. Almost immediately, the aircraft's behavior began to change. At first, it was barely noticeable. The controls felt slightly different, as if the aircraft were heavier than expected. The response lagged behind the input. A small trend appeared in the instruments, subtle enough to be dismissed as temporary. In isolation, it would not justify panic. But aviation is not about isolated signs. It is about patterns. In aviation, patterns matter more than any single warning or instrument reading. A lone anomaly can often be explained away. Sensors fail, data fluctuates, minor inconsistencies appear and disappear on every flight. Crews are trained to expect that. What matters is how those inconsistencies align over time, whether they reinforce each other, whether they point in the same direction, and whether the response to them produces stability or further deviation. This is where experience becomes a double-edged sword. Experienced crews have seen countless false alarms resolve themselves. They have learned when a situation is truly dangerous and when it is simply inconvenient. That judgment is valuable, but it can also create blind spots. Familiarity can dull urgency. Confidence can replace verification. And when a situation feels similar to something encountered before, the mind naturally tries to fit it into an existing category. In this case, the emerging pattern did not match the crew's expectation. But patterns take time to reveal themselves. They do not announce their meaning immediately. By the time enough clues were present to challenge the initial assumption, the aircraft had already begun drifting away from a stable state. As the crew continued, corrections failed to produce the expected results. The aircraft was still flying. The engines were still producing thrust. The systems were active. And yet the overall picture no longer matched what the crew expected to see. Inside the cockpit, confidence began to erode. The tone of the conversation changed. Statements became questions. Questions were repeated. The rhythm that had been calm and automatic turned fragmented. When systems behave in unexpected ways, the human mind tries to protect its first explanation. You search for details that fit. You downplay details that do not. This is how fixation begins. Fixation is not stupidity. It is a human defense mechanism. The brain simplifies complexity so action feels possible. In many situations, that instinct saves lives. In aviation, it can lead directly to the wrong solution. As the aircraft continued to deviate, the crew attempted to adapt. They tried different inputs. They discussed possible causes. They referenced memory items. Actions pilots are trained to recall instantly when time is short. But because they had committed early to a specific interpretation, every new action was filtered through that belief. Time, which had felt abundant moments earlier, suddenly became scarce. Every second now carried weight. The margin for safe recovery narrowed with each moment the aircraft remained unstable. Procedures that might have worked earlier became less effective as altitude, speed, and configuration drifted away from the safe envelope. At some point, the crew realized the problem was not what they thought it was. That realization carries a particular kind of fear. Not the fear of an explosion, but the fear of understanding you are behind the aircraft. You are reacting instead of leading. The machine is doing exactly what physics dictates, but your plan no longer matches reality. The aircraft entered a rapid descent. Not violently at first, not in a cinematic plunge. It was a descent driven by a chain of inputs and aerodynamic consequences, compounding over time. There were no heroic last-second maneuvers, no perfectly delivered final transmission, just a struggle to regain control as options disappeared. And then silence. All 154 people on board lost their lives. When investigators arrived at the scene, they encountered something unsettling. There was no evidence of sabotage. There was no single catastrophic mechanical failure. The aircraft did not explode. The engines did not simply quit. Instead, the aircraft behaved exactly as a complex system behaves when it receives the wrong inputs under the wrong assumptions. The flight data recorder told the story in numbers. The cockpit voice recorder told it in voices, confidence, confusion, attempts to reconcile belief with reality. Investigators reconstructed the flight second by second. They examined system modes, control inputs, training records, and procedures. The conclusion was uncomfortable. The aircraft was not inherently unsafe. The crew was not incompetent. The accident emerged from the interaction between human decision-making and system behavior. One of the most important findings involved assumptions. In complex systems, assumptions are unavoidable. But safety depends on the ability to challenge them quickly when evidence changes. In this case, the early decision created commitment. Commitment created momentum, and momentum made reassessment harder as time and altitude were traded away. Pilots study accidents like this because the pattern feels familiar. A small deviation, confidence that experience will be enough. A delayed realization that experience cannot replace discipline. Procedures can feel rigid, they can feel slow. But their purpose is not to insult judgment. Their purpose is to protect humans from the cognitive traps that appear under stress. Certainty is seductive. It feels like control. It feels like leadership. But certainty can be wrong. That is why modern training emphasizes humility. The willingness to pause, to verify, to follow the structure designed to catch errors when intuition misleads. Because in aviation, being fast only matters if you are correct. For 6 seconds, being fast felt right. Those 6 seconds shaped the rest of the flight. Once the decision was made, everything that followed was built on its logic. And when the foundation was wrong, the outcome became increasingly difficult to escape. The tragedy is not just the crash. The tragedy is how plausible the path was. How easy it is to imagine the same decision being made on any ordinary day by an experienced crew facing a familiar situation. That is why this story endures. Not because it is unique, but because it reveals something universal. In complex systems, the smallest decisions can carry the heaviest consequences. Subscribe for more real stories where a single decision changed everything.